Elias pushed open the heavy door of the alien bar, his boots scuffing the metallic floor as he stepped inside. The noise, a cacophony of alien voices and clinking glasses, dropped to a murmur. Every eye turned toward him, not in awe, but in bemusement. He held a small bear cub in his arms, its golden fur soft and fluffy, a stark contrast to the hardened and scarred patrons lounging in the smoky haze. Galactic lords, mercenaries, and bounty hunters, all part of the notorious elite, filled the room. The cub squirmed, letting out a soft growl, but Elias remained still, his face unreadable. He walked calmly toward the bar, unbothered by the whispers and chuckles that followed him. He wasn't here for attention. But that didn't stop the comments. "Look at this one!" a deep, gravelly voice called from the back. Elias didn't need to look to know who it belonged to, one of the galactic lords, their arrogant sneers louder than their words. "A human, and he brings a pet into our bar?" Another voice, this one sharp and cutting, joined in. "You think that little thing will protect you? It's barely a snack for me." The room burst into laughter, the sound grating against Elias's ears, but he said nothing. He placed the cub on the floor by his feet and waited for the bartender, who eyed him suspiciously. "One drink," Elias said, his voice low but firm. Before the bartender could respond, a massive, scaled hand slammed onto the bar next to him. Elias turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting the yellow eyes of a towering alien covered in armor. This galactic lord was notorious, a hulking brute known for crushing weaker beings beneath his boots, both literally and metaphorically. "You've got guts, human," the lord sneered, leaning closer. His breath smelled of something rotten. "But this isn't the place for your kind, and it sure as hell isn't a place for that furball." He gestured dismissively at the bear cub, which now sat calmly at Elias's side. The cub's eyes flashed for a moment, but Elias placed a hand on its head, gently calming it. "I'll be gone soon," Elias said, his tone steady. "Just a drink." The lord's laugh was a deep rumble, reverberating through the bar. "You'll be gone all right." He snatched a drink from the bar, tossing the contents onto Elias's chest. Liquid soaked into his jacket, dripping onto the floor, but Elias didn't flinch. His face remained expressionless, eyes locked on the galactic lords. The bar fell silent, tension creeping into the air. The galactic lord expected anger, a reaction, anything, but Elias remained unmoved. "I'll be back," Elias said quietly, wiping the drink from his jacket. He reached down and picked up the cub, cradling it gently in his arms. "And when I return, you won't be laughing," the lord scoffed, stepping back. "Big words for a human with a pet," he spat, waving Elias off as if he were nothing. Elias turned and walked calmly toward the exit, the weight of every mocking gaze trailing him. The door closed behind him with a dull thud, and the room exploded into laughter once again. Outside, the night was cool and still, the stars twinkling in the distance above the busy streets of the city. Elias looked down at the cub in his arms. It blinked up at him, intelligent eyes watching his every move. "They think you're just a pet," Elias murmured, stroking the cub's fur. "But they'll see. Soon enough, they'll see." The cub growled softly, as if understanding, and nestled closer to him. Elias's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, a rare expression from someone as controlled as him. He knew what was coming, and in a few days so would the galactic lords. As he walked into the shadows of the city, the laughter of the bar behind him slowly faded into the distance. Soon, it would be replaced by something else entirely. When he returned, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. The bar door creaked open again, and this time, the air itself seemed to tense. Elias stepped inside, but he was no longer alone. Behind him, 3 hulking figures followed, war-bears, each towering at least 7 feet tall on all fours, their black, shaggy fur gleaming in the dim light. The low hum of conversation in the bar faltered, and then silence fell. The galactic lords, mercenaries, and bounty hunters who had once laughed at the sight of a mere cub now stared, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion, then fear. The lead bear growled, its golden eyes scanning the room, sizing up every being present. Its muscles rippled under its fur, and the glint of metal on its claws hinted at something far more dangerous than a wild animal. Elias stood in the center, his posture calm, as if he had merely returned with old friends. "Didn't think I'd see you again, human," the same galactic lord from days before sneered, though his voice lacked the bravado it once held. His eyes flickered nervously to the bears. "Looks like you've brought some new toys." Elias said nothing. He took a step forward, the bears moving in perfect sync with him, their heavy paws making the floor vibrate slightly. The galactic patrons shifted in their seats, trying to act nonchalant, but their eyes betrayed them. Fear. Elias could see it clear as day. "You laughed at me last time," Elias began, his voice low and steady. "Mocked what you didn't understand." He glanced at the galactic lord who had thrown the drink at him. "But now you'll see what a mistake that was." The lord's face twisted in defiance. "You think I'm afraid of some overgrown pets?" He stood, towering over the others, his armored hand reaching for the weapon at his side. "We don't bow to humans, not here, not anywhere." Elias didn't blink. With a barely perceptible nod, one of the war bears surged forward, faster than the eye could follow. In a blur of motion, it knocked the lord back, pinning him to the wall with a single, massive paw. The alien struggled, his armor screeching under the bear's weight, but he was utterly powerless. "Let me explain something to you," Elias said, stepping closer, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "These aren't pets. They're war bears. Bioengineered. Weapons stronger and faster than anything you've ever seen." He tilted his head slightly, watching as the lord squirmed under the bear's claw. "But more than that, they're mine." The room had frozen in shock. Patrons who once wore mocking smirks now sat stiffly, eyes wide as they watched the scene unfold. Sweat trickled down one mercenary's forehead as he tried to edge toward the door, but another bear stepped in his path with a warning growl. The lord gasped, his bravado crumbling as the bear's claws tightened around his chest plate. His weapon clattered to the floor, useless. "Do you understand now?" Elias asked, his tone icy. "You're not in control here." The galactic lord, once full of arrogance and superiority, was now pale, his voice barely above a whisper. I get it. Call them off." Elias raised a hand, and the war bear released him, letting the alien slump to the floor, gasping for breath. The tension in the room reached its breaking point. No one dared move, the weight of what had just happened settling in the air like a thick fog. The other galactic lords looked at each other, their eyes betraying their fear, but none spoke. None dared to challenge Elias now. He had come back as promised, and the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. "Remember this," Elias said, his voice cutting through the stillness. "The next time you look down on someone, the next time you mock what you don't understand, think twice." He gestured toward the war bears, now standing calm but alert at his side. "These bears could tear this place apart in seconds, but they won't, because I control them. And I choose to leave you alive." One of the bounty hunters, trying to keep his voice steady, asked, "Why are you doing this, human? You could have killed us all." Elias turned toward him, his eyes cold but unwavering. "Because it's not about killing. It's about making sure you remember who you laughed at." He paused, then added, "Next time, you won't be so quick to judge." He turned on his heel, the bears following in perfect unison, their massive forms brushing past the stunned patrons as they made their way to the exit. The galactic lord, still on the floor, stared after them, his pride shattered along with the silence. As Elias pushed the door open and the cold night air rushed in, he glanced back one last time. "You were lucky today," he said quietly. "But luck runs out." With that, he stepped out into the night, the war bears at his side. The bar door closed behind him, leaving the patrons in a stunned, uneasy silence. When they finally dared to speak again, the laughter was gone. Elias moved silently through the darkened alleyways, the war bears following him with measured steps, their presence a shadowy menace. The city hummed around him, alien voices, distant engines, and the occasional burst of laughter from another bar somewhere far away. He kept his pace steady, his mind focused. His return to the Galactic Lord's stronghold was just the beginning. Now they would come for him. He had made them afraid, and fear had a way of breeding retaliation. They wouldn't let his humiliation of their lord go unanswered. But that was part of his plan. The bears shifted restlessly as they approached the open street, their heightened senses picking up what Elias already knew: he was being followed. He paused, turning his head slightly, listening. Footsteps, too light to belong to a galactic lord, but deliberate, calculated. They were sending someone to track him, likely an assassin or scout to gauge his strength. Elias glanced at his bears, giving them a silent signal. Without a sound, they melted into the shadows, their large forms disappearing as if they had never been there. Elias walked forward calm, the predator now baiting his trap. The figure behind him quickened its pace, growing bolder as Elias feigned ignorance. Just as he reached the corner of a deserted street, the assailant made their move, a quick dash, silent but for the hiss of a blade being drawn. Elias pivoted at the last second, his arms shooting out to block the strike. The blade glinted in the faint light of the alley as it stopped inches from his face. His attacker, a wiry alien with skin like cracked stone, hissed in frustration, eyes glowing with the thrill of the hunt. But Elias's expression remained impassive. "You should have brought more," he said coldly, twisting the alien's wrist with a practiced motion, forcing the blade to clatter to the ground. The alien struggled, but Elias didn't need to fight. With another signal, the bears emerged from the darkness, their growls low and menacing. The assassin's eyes widened in terror as he realized just how outmatched he was. Please," the alien stammered, dropping to his knees, his arrogance evaporating. "I was only sent to watch." "They'll send more." "I know," Elias said simply. "And when they do, they'll find what you found." He gave a subtle nod, and the lead war bear stepped forward, its massive paw hovering over the alien's trembling form. "You have one chance to go back," Elias continued, his voice low but sharp as steel. "Tell them that this ends now, or I won't be so lenient next time." The alien nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet and backing away, never taking his eyes off the bears. Elias watched as the scout fled into the night, his heart racing loud enough for the bears to hear long after he had disappeared from sight. Elias knelt, stroking the thick fur of the nearest bear. "They won't stop," he murmured. The bears rumbled in agreement, their primal instincts sensing the coming storm. Elias knew what was coming, a full-on retaliation from the Galactic Lords. He had wounded their pride, and that was something they would never forgive. He had a few hours, maybe less, before they gathered their forces and came for him. But he wasn't afraid. If they wanted to test him and his bears, they would learn the hard way. He rose and made his way toward the edge of the city, where a small, abandoned compound lay nestled among the industrial wasteland. It was nothing special, just a place forgotten by the chaos of the galaxy, but it would serve his purposes. He and the bears entered through the rusted gate, the old steel creaking under the pressure. Inside, Elias set up camp, his mind calculating the next steps. He placed sensors around the perimeter, ensuring that nothing could approach without him knowing. The war bears prowled around the compound, restless, their golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They were ready. And so was Elias. The hours stretched on, the silence growing heavier with each passing minute. He could feel it, the tension building, the anticipation of an inevitable confrontation. He sat against a broken wall, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. There would be no going back after this. Just as the moon dipped behind the horizon, the sound of engines echoed in the distance. The Galactic Lords were coming. Elias stood, his hand resting on the nearest bear's head. "It's time." The war bears gathered around him, their growls low and synchronized, their bodies tensing for battle. In the distance, Elias could see the glowing lights of the approaching vehicles, and he knew they were bringing their best: mercenaries, bounty hunters, perhaps even more galactic lords. They wouldn't underestimate him again. But that wouldn't save them. As the first transport touched down, the ground trembled, and figures began to pour out, heavily armed, armored, and ready for war. They spread out, their weapons gleaming under the faint light of the compound's floodlights. Elias smiled, a rare expression that never quite reached his eyes. He gave one final command to the bears. "Let's show them what happens when you corner a predator." The war bears charged. The war bears tore into the enemy lines with the force of a storm. Their massive bodies, designed for destruction, moved with terrifying precision, shredding through armor and flesh alike. The sound of metal crumpling and weapons discharging filled the air, but it was no use. The Galactic Lord's forces, armed with blasters and energy shields, were no match for the brutal efficiency of claws and fangs that seemed to come from every direction at once. Elias stood back, watching the chaos unfold with the same calm he had carried into the bar days before. He moved with purpose, positioning himself just behind the fight, his eyes scanning the battlefield. His connection with the bears was more than just a bond, it was a symbiosis. He could feel their instincts, their hunger for victory. They were not pets, nor mere tools. They were extensions of his will, and tonight, they would deliver his message. A squad of armored mercenaries advanced toward Elias, clearly targeting him as the source of the threat. Their leader barked orders, his voice distorted by the helmet's comms system. Elias didn't move, didn't even flinch as they opened fire, the ground erupting around him with plasma bursts. With a single thought, his lead war bear broke off from the main assault, charging at the squad with a deafening roar. The mercenaries barely had time to raise their shields before the bear crashed into them, sending bodies flying in every direction. Elias stepped forward, picking up one of the fallen weapons, examining it as if it were of no more concern than a discarded toy. The mercenary captain, the last one standing, aimed his weapon directly at Elias, hands trembling. "Stay back!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. Elias met his gaze. "You don't have to die tonight," he said, his tone even, devoid of threat. "But you will if you don't walk away now." The captain hesitated, his grip tightening on the trigger, but the bear that loomed behind him made the decision for him. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, hands raised in surrender. The tension in the air was palpable, the screams and explosions of battle still echoing in the background. Elias turned his back on the captain, uninterested in finishing the fight. The message had been sent. The Galactic Lords would learn that they were not untouchable, not invincible. The war bears had made sure of that. But the Lords weren't finished. Elias knew there would be one final act, one desperate move. From behind the smoldering wreckage of a downed transport, a lone figure emerged. Unlike the others, this one was different. Taller, more imposing. His armor was sleek black, with a shimmering energy field that rippled around him like liquid shadow. A Galactic Lord, one of the highest-ranking Elias had encountered yet. The Lord stepped forward, unshaken by the carnage around him. "You think you can challenge us?" His voice was deep, vibrating with the weight of authority. "We are the rulers of the stars. You're nothing more than a nuisance." Elias's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained calm. "Maybe I am," he said. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're bleeding. And I'm the one who made it happen." The Lord sneered, raising his hand. A pulse of energy shot toward Elias, but before it could make contact, one of the war bears leapt into the path, absorbing the blast with a growl that shook the ground. The bear staggered, its fur singed, but it stood firm. The Galactic Lord's expression twisted into something darker. "You think these creatures will save you?" He raised his arm again, gathering more power. Elias didn't respond. Instead, he reached out with his mind, linking with the bears in a way that felt like second nature. The war bears, sensing his command, circled around the Lord, their golden eyes glowing in the dim light. Each movement was synchronized, controlled. The Galactic Lord's confidence wavered as the circle closed in. For the first time, the Lord hesitated. He took a step back, glancing between the bears and Elias. "You're nothing," he hissed, but the venom in his voice had lost its edge. Elias stepped forward, his voice soft but cutting through the noise. "You've ruled with fear for too long," he said. "Now it's your turn to be afraid." In a blur of motion, the bears struck. The Galactic Lord's shield flared, but it was no use. Claws tore through the energy field like paper, and within seconds the Lord was on his knees, his once untouchable armor in tatters, his face pale with shock. Elias stood over him, the weight of victory settling around them like the dust from the battle. "Go back to your kind," Elias said quietly. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them that if they want to survive, they'll need to rethink their place in this galaxy." The Lord, trembling, nodded weakly. He struggled to his feet, limping away as the war bears stood down, their eyes still glowing with the remnants of the fight. The compound was silent now, save for the distant hum of the retreating transports. The Galactic Lords had lost, and they knew it. Elias watched them disappear into the night, his bears by his side, their loyalty unwavering. As the last of the enemy faded from sight, Elias knelt beside the lead war bear, running a hand through its thick fur. "It's over for now," he murmured. The bear rumbled in response, its massive body relaxing slightly. But Elias knew better than to let his guard down completely. This was only the beginning. The Galactic Lords would return, but next time, they wouldn't just be facing Elias and his bears. Next time, the entire galaxy would know the strength of those they had once underestimated. Elias stood, the night settling in around him like a cloak, and walked into the shadows, his war bears following close behind.